The Earthquake song by the Little Girls on Revenge of the 80s Radio. The Little Girls came out with 2 albums last year. Brand new music in one of them, Today and Yesterday, which also featured some previously unreleased material from 1985. And Thank Heaven for Valley Pop, sort of a reprise of Thank Heaven with some extras thrown in. With me now on Revenge of the 80s Radio is one of the nation's top investment and management experts, seen on CNBC and all over the entire business media spectrum. She also had a hit song and video in 1984 with My Boyfriend's Back. This is Mary Buffett. Mary, thanks for coming on Revenge of the 80s Radio with me.
Chris, it's my pleasure.
Mary, most people know you as the investment and business management author, and you recently wrote the book Warren Buffett's Management Secrets with co-author David Clark. We're going to talk with you as Mary Buffett, the music biz band manager and singer, a side very few of your current fans know. You were in and out of the music biz for some time before singing and getting into the studio. Tell us about that part of your career.
Well, really, I left high school to go into the studio with Phil Spector, and that sounds pretty great. It's a great opening, isn't it? But it's actually true. My older sister was dating a guy named Richie from the Bronx, and he was a pool hustler from New York. And in those days, all the music executives like Ahmet Ertegun and Jerry Wexler and Phil used to love to back these pool hustlers. And that's how I met Phil. I went to one of the exhibitions, and there was Phil and Ahmet and a bunch of people, and Phil, he liked the young pretty girls and kind of came over and introduced himself, and I had no idea who he was. And finally, after a long time of calling me and wanting to show me what he does, I went to Gold Star Recording Studios and hung out, and that was the beginning of my career.
So what did you do in stage one of your music career?
Really, I learned about the recording business just from observation, and Phil would have me hit the chimes and clap for tracks, and then I began to know amazing artists, the Blossoms, Nino Tempo and April Stevens, Sonny and Cher, the Righteous Brothers, everyone that was around at that time, and learned a lot about publishing and where the real money was. And then as I kind of grew out of that, I started writing and found writing partners. Harold Beatty was a first writing partner of mine, and he introduced me to a producer named George Tobin, and George was producing Ike and Tina Turner, and Sly Stone was using his studios. So it was a really wild scene. And then I started working at April Blackwood Music, which I was trying to sell my songs to all the time. It was Columbia Records music publishing companies, and became acquainted with some of the guys there, and got a little job trying to get some records on the radio for $5 a radio station. And that really worked into me getting invited to an industry event that led me to meet Larry Cohen, who at the time was the president of Epic Records, which was really the label at the time. They had so many fabulous artists, and Hugh Hefner was starting his record label, motion picture, television division, and he hired Larry Cohen. Larry Cohen offered me a job as professional manager for Playboy Music and After Dark Music. They're ASCAP BMI companies, and bingo, I was a music executive at the ripe old age of, I think, 18.
So here you are, an executive. You're the boss. You get to go to the executive bathrooms. You get to hang out with the big boys. But you wound up in the studio anyway. What brought you into a singing career?
When I was writing with Harold Beatty, I always was the one singing the songs that we would write or that he would write and be doing demos with. And then I met a lot of other artists of the day, Rick Lisi, Deke Richards, and everybody, would go into in those days, the publishers had their own little recording studios. I was signed to Pure Southern Music Publishing Company for a while, and you would go in and you would actually do your demo, and then they'd send it out for different artists that wanted to record it. And so, I really started there, and I really loved the studio. I loved being behind the mic, and then I had bigger roles managing different people, whether they were songwriters or I at one time managed Spike Lee's daughter, Leslie Jones, had an all-girl band that I managed for a short period of time. She became a brilliant engineer. She engineered Herbie Hancock's record in San Francisco and was head of our society and still is probably engineering records.
With me on Revenge of the 80s Radio is Mary Buffett. Mary Buffett had a big hit in 1984 with My Boyfriend's Back, and that was with the Moby Dick Records label. How did you hook up with Moby Dick, Mary?
Well, actually, I was married to Peter Buffett at the time, and he was a musician, and we had a small studio in our home in San Francisco. And we kind of hooked up because our neighbors were animators, and they worked for Colossal Pictures, which developed the MTV logos. And then there was another company up there called One Pass Film and Video, and this was just the time that MTV was breaking, and One Pass Film and Video wanted to do a reel so they could show that they could do music videos. And so they came to me because I was kind of known in the area as a singer for other producers, myself, a girl named Annie Stocking and Jeanette Sartain, and we worked with Ed Bogus and a lot of the other producers of music for commercials in town. And so Scott Ross, who is the president of One Pass Video, said, "Hey, Mary, would you be interested in doing a music video for us because we need it for our reel?" And I said, "Sure." And, now that I think of it, at the time there was a music label, Megatone Records, which was the inspiration for Moby Dick Records. And it was really predominantly, the label was geared towards the gay scene in San Francisco, and it was huge at that time, and dance music and disco music was in, and there was a producer named Johnny Hedges, a.k.a. Johnny Disco, and Patrick Cowley was huge at the time, and my girlfriend Lisa had one of the first really number one records with Jump Shout, and it was the Boys Town Gang and so on. And so they really influenced me. I think it was Johnny Hedges that said, "Hey, why don't you do my cover of My Boyfriend's Back?" And we did, and actually the director was Scott Ross, who went on to become the president of Digital Domain, James Cameron's company, who did the Titanic and many other films. And Jim Morris is now the president, I believe, of ILM, Industrial Light and Magic. And the line producer was Mary Ensign, who was the line producer on Beat It. So, and the cameraman, Joe Murray, is a brilliant cinematographer and director now. And so everybody who is involved we all went on to do other things in different areas, and I wound up writing finance books about Warren Buffett. But my heart is still in music. I love it.
Funny thing about My Boyfriend's Back, Mary Buffett, you were telling me a little earlier before we got on the air together that it was an interesting adventure when you were trying to put the backing vocals together.
Yeah, we thought it would be really simple, and Peter was great. He recreated the tracks, and I certainly could sing the song, and we got it in my key and so on, because the song at the very end, you really have to have some range to hit that high note at the end. And we thought, the backgrounds will be easy. We got our friends Joe Lowe, who were singers on the label, and we got even Paul Parker and Lisa, I think, and a group of us got together, and we were having so much trouble trying to recreate the simplest "Hey la, my boyfriend's back," and so we couldn't figure out. We were trying to figure out the harmonies, and we thought we had them down, but it just didn't sound right. And finally, Peter would slow the track down, and we'd listen really carefully, trying to pick out what those harmonies were, and we thought, you know what? It sounds like these are guys singing, and they sped it up. It sounded like they were originally maybe guys. Maybe it wasn't the Angels at all. So I think what we did is we actually got my friend Paul Parker and a few other guys in there, and we sang it at a slower speed and then speeded it up, and sure enough, we got that sound. So it was fun experimenting with it.
Mary, you had a couple of follow-ups to My Boyfriend's Back, right?
Well, we did. I had a band called SFO, and we were trying to do covers, and it was successful. And then I did a cover of "If I Only Had a Brain" with a great singer named Andy Preboy, who was out of the punk scene. He was singing at that time for a group called Eye Protection San Francisco, and went on to become the lead singer of Wall of Voodoo here in Los Angeles. And at that time, because I sang not only for myself, but I really liked backups, I did a lot of backup singing for groups like another punk group called Vice Grip, who was notorious, and we would play the Berkeley Square, and there was Neon Tetra, and there was the Mabuhay Gardens on Broadway in San Francisco, and so I kind of, and the Stone, I kind of went between punk rock and disco. I mean, obviously, the Trocadero Transfer was the place, the Arena, all of the Probe in Los Angeles, all those places that all of the artists on the disco labels were playing. So it was a wonderful experience. I mean, the Trocadero Transfer was it. I mean, Peter and I recorded Sylvester right before his huge comeback hit, and the 2 Tons of Fun, and it was really amazing. Actually, Moby Dick Records was mentioned in Time magazine because it was the record label. It was the biggest independent record label, and they had a lot of disco hits in the early 80s, and sadly, 7 of its 10 core employees died of AIDS, and the record label folded.
Yeah, that's a sad story. Mary, I want to go back to you mentioning that you worked with Andy Preboy with Tokyo Calls for Aid. We had Andy on Revenge of the 80s a while back. He's a brilliant fellow. What was it like working with him?
Oh, and Andy was just beyond being a brilliant musician and singer, just such a natural talent with a voice. He was completely punked out, in the 80s. I mean, spiked hair, the big black boots, and, he had it down. And yet he was possibly one of the sweetest, kindest people I'd ever met. I remember we had a birthday. It was his birthday, and he and one of the girls he was seeing at the time, who was kind of rough and tumble, came to our house, and our daughters probably were about 7 or so years old, and they just loved Andy, and he was a kid to me, because I was still very young, but I had been in the business for so long that I felt like I was a veteran. But he was just amazing, and I remember we had our recording booth that we sang in was actually our closet adjacent to the studio, And I remember when we did that cover of If I Only Had a Brain, and the band was Tokyo Calls for Aid. I remember standing in that small room, the mic being up a little high because Andy was tall and I was short, and just as soon as he opened his mouth, I was just like, oh my God, what a singer. I mean, he just blew me away. I don't even know if you can hear me on the record, to be honest with you, but I was singing.
So, Mary, what made you make the transition to being a financial investment business writer and leader from the music industry?
Well, I'll be perfectly honest with you. The breakup from Peter, I had spent up until really 1991, I had spent my entire life in a recording studio every day. Peter and I had our own, and prior to that, I was in somebody's recording studio. And when we divorced, I had always run our businesses, and I was always very business-minded. And his father was obviously Warren Buffett, and at that time, over 12 years of marriage, I learned a great deal about business from Warren, besides running our own business. And I've got to say, it kind of broke my heart. The music kind of died for a while. It was hard for me to step into a studio. I was so used to working with Peter and other friends of mine that we were very close with, and we had moved from San Francisco to Milwaukee, so it was a totally other scene. And then when we divorced, I moved back to Los Angeles, and I started working with a video production company that did music videos at the time, and I was their music consultant, their management consultant for business. And then I went on and to start an editorial film company. So I was still around, music was still in my life, but it wasn't the main focus of my life. You never know. That's the great thing about singers. You can always sing even when you're old, even when you get old. Look at Tony Bennett. When actually I have a fond memory of when the Golden Gate Bridge had its 50th anniversary. There was a station called Magic 61 that played all that great music of that era, and a friend of mine, Ed Bogus, wrote the song Happy Birthday Goldie with me singing it, and Frank Sinatra, Tony Bennett did the voiceover. And I just never I thought, oh my God, I've really made my career when I sing a song and Tony Bennett is doing the voiceover. And then later that night, we went to the event, and Nelson Riddle was there, and Tony was singing, and I really was never a great performer. I was a little too shy. I preferred being in the studio. So who knows, I might get back into the studio one of these days.
That would be nice. Your latest book, Mary, is Warren Buffett's Management Secrets. It's available on Amazon, all sorts of booksellers, as are your past books. Check them out. Mary Buffett, thank you once again for coming on with us.
Thank you so much. I'm a big fan of your show, and I go back, and if you talk to Andy Preboy, tell him to give me a shout-out. You've got my number.
You got it. Now let's play the track that put Mary Buffett on the musical map. My Boyfriend's Back with Moby Dick Records on Revenge of the 80s Radio.